Hello, everyone, and welcome to another live stream Own Your Judaism conversation. My name is Moish Steigman, aka the Mindful Rabbi, and I am thrilled and excited to have a friend and a colleague joining me today, Phil Cohen. Phil's bio is extensive. I am not going to read it in its entirety. That would take all of the time that we have for our conversation this afternoon. So I'm going to give some excerpts of some of the wonderful things that Phil is doing now. And then in a moment, I'll invite Phil to plug in any holes that he'd like to. In 2002, with over 20 years of experience in Jewish learning, teaching, mentoring, and managing, Phil started Dugma. Today, Dugma's various educational programs employ more than 100 full and part-time team members who serve as mentors, educators, and role models. Phil believes that Dugma enables their students to find their voice and otherwise become global citizens as well as role models for their peers. And I am sure Phil will share a lot more about what Dugma is. He is also the founder, I love this title, by the way, he is the founder and chief shidduch maker at Me'ever, which provides high-quality experiential travel opportunities to multiple places, including Israel. We'll talk more about that because, as you might have seen from a recent email of mine, I am honored to join the Me'ever team as the lead educator and meeting maker. And Phil is also the founder and CEO of Prestige Prep, one of New York City's leading supplemental educational services and tutoring centers. In addition, Phil and I have known each other. Maybe he'll have a slightly better memory. Probably coming up on 40 years, 35 to 40 years. He's a great guy, a wonderful person, a fantasy football adversary. So it is my joy and pleasure to welcome Phil Cohen. Phil, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Moish, for having me and so forth. Yeah, I think we've known each other actually probably even a little bit longer. I think I remember meeting you when you were like 8 or 9 years old at Shul for the first time.
Yeah, so it's wonderful.
Definitely going for 40 plus years.
It's amazing. Yeah, we can go back to childhood. I'm not 48, by the way.
Oh, all right. So then it's 40 years for me, we'll say. Okay, I'm the older one here.
Yeah, no, I'm 45. I'm 45.
All right. Sure, lucky you then.
Oh, thank you. So in a moment, Phil, I'm going to invite you to fill in any parts of the biography that I didn't read that's important to you. I will say this to everyone watching: even though Phil and I have known each other before, anytime I have any guest on this conversation series, I always talk a little bit ahead of time, share some of the questions ahead of time. Ask if there's anything in particular someone wants me to ask, or ask if there's anything in particular they don't want me to ask. Phil has said it is off grounds, off limits for us to engage in live fantasy football trades.
I would agree. I would probably say that's the one point of contention. You and I, over the years, we've had some very good philosophical discussions and debates, but the only time I'd say it ever gets contentious is when we talk about fantasy football. So we can
forget this whole conversation right now and make a trade right now. What do you think, Phil?
Well, if you're going to offer something for real, we could talk.
I knew you'd back down. I knew it. All right. So thanks again for joining. Anything in particular first from your bio that you want to fill in a little bit?
No, outside of the fact that it shows that I'm aging. I think other than that, I think you did a very nice job of highlighting some of the opportunities I've had over the course of my career and my life. And as hopefully you can see, there's a thematic approach that my whole goal is to kind of work with kids and help them find their voice and help them find their way and help them understand that, they are the next generation of leaders in our community. So that has been my mission since I was a teen myself, I think.
Well, obviously I love that mission and I think it's a powerful one. And thank you for serving as such a role model and mentor. Tell us a little bit about your Jewish life. I know you've been involved in Judaism really your entire life, but tell us a little bit about
your life. So there's a lot of history. I moved to Wisconsin when I just turned 10, and my mom had a chance to remarry the cantor at a synagogue in Milwaukee, a congregation Beth Israel. So I walked into a new community. I would argue a little bit as the cantor's child, which, as you can imagine, has many different connotations to it. I was thrust into an environment that was new to me, and it took me some time to learn and get my sea legs around that way of life. And it taught me that there's probably was a valuable life lesson. It taught me that there's not one way to approach something. That was a conservative synagogue with specific ways of practicing your Judaism. And there's different, there's pros and cons to every form of how you practice what you choose to do or what you're chosen to do for you at that moment in life. And it just taught me and that as I got older and started to understand what that was about, that I had to find my own path personally. And it also helped guide me into some professional work, obviously, as well, too, through my work with Dugma and my strong connectivity to Israel and bringing Israel back to our families here in, as we say, in the diaspora. So I think it has had obviously a very significant impact on who I've become, both personally and obviously what I'm doing professionally.
So let me follow up with that, if it's okay, before we get to the professional work. You talked about helping people through Dugma to find their voice. I talk about owning your Judaism, and not to undermine either one of our messages, but those are beautiful words and they're beautiful concepts. But you seem to have figured out for yourself how to do that. How did you do that? How did you go from Cantor's kid, 10 years old, new city, new state, Milwaukee, to realizing that you need to find your own path and figuring that out for yourself?
Well, look, obviously nothing happens overnight, right? Nothing happens easily. It's been a lifelong journey, and obviously it's one that's continuing now that I have two boys, because I have to figure out how I impact my own learned way to approach Judaism to theirs, because I don't want to cloud their judgment, but I want them to be informed as well. I've had a chance over the years to work for many wonderful different organizations in the Jewish world, from BBYO to Hadassah and Young Judea and so forth, to Masada Israel travel programs. I think all of them help shape my ongoing cultural and social connectivity to Judaism. Parts of it were overlapping with the religious side of the equation, but it was a little bit more of finding Judaism in your kishkas and not necessarily through a prayer book and so forth. So I think that had a strong impact. And one of the big influences when I was working for Hadassah, I was fortunate to be in a senior leadership position working with their year-round movement program. And I was getting to travel the country and meet all the different students and the lay leaders and these wonderful Hadassah women who really were the anchors of who we became. But as I was doing that, I was moving farther and farther away from my interaction directly with the kids. And to me, that's a little bit of my lifeline, my chance of breathing, is when I'm interacting with students. That's what I love more than anything. And I remember that, as many of us do that day, it was September 11th, 2001, when the tragedy occurred. And I was at the Hadassah office on 59th Street, and the alarms went off and we had to evacuate. And I walked home to my apartment in the Upper West Side, not really truly understanding what was unfolding. And it made me realize that I'm sitting in an office and I'm helping to pull strings, but I'm not out there actually tying the shoes or helping the kids find their way. And I realized at that moment that I had to shift. And I'm sure that was a pivotal moment for many of us in that time. And I remember walking in and talking to Jerome Krakow, my mentor and my boss at the time at Young Judea. And it was time to make a change. And I continued on what I was doing for a few more months. And, at the right time, I decided to walk away, finish the master's degree that I started and then had a chance to complete. And then I started Dugma. And it was very evident for me because the Dugma, the company name comes from a phrase called Dugma Yashit. And obviously I took out the word Yashit because we all can make enough jokes about that word in English. So we just condensed into the word Dugma, which means to be a role model. And I really believe the notion that we're supposed to be the role models for the next generation. I mean, there's a Milwaukeean that I've talked to you about before over the years, Moish, Milt Ettenheim, who was a mentor to me when I was a child. And I remember him vividly, helping me when I needed those moments in life to kind of find my path. And he just said, stay your course, be who you are, and you'll find it, and you'll find what you're supposed to become. And then when the times come, you'll pay it forward in the same way that, you feel that I'm paying it forward to you. And, so I always have Milts on one shoulder and my bubbies on the other one. And so I started Dugma, which obviously means to lead by example, to be a role model. And that's kind of the essence of who we become. And I don't think there's one way to be a practicing Jew. I don't think synagogue life is the only way. I don't think culturally is the only way. I don't think one's more right than the other. I have my own shtick when people say you must do something one way, when, as we know, there's many ways to cook eggs, and there's not one way that's better than the other, as long as you're full and satisfied and passing it forward. And that's where the notion of Dugma came, because I had a chance to see what was happening, but primarily in the New York market. I mean, kids are busy everywhere, but I really started to understand the notion of the New York minute, which means these kids have so much to do and they're overscheduled, and it's like the pile of bills, like you keep putting the least important ones on the stack, and that keeps growing. So you keep paying and obviously Judaism and Hebrew school and learning kept staying on that stack and never kind of left for a lot of kids here in New York. And it just made me realize that there has to be not only one way of doing it, there's many ways to do something. So that's where Dugma came. And I want to try to help those unaffiliated families in New York find their way and find their message to kind of give back to their kids. You know, sometimes Hebrew school of Mondays, Thursdays, and Sundays didn't work if you were a musician or an artist or an athlete or in theater. And it was causing, like, you know, then there was constant debating happening in the house and fighting about, you know, Hebrew school and what Judaism means. And, you know, no offense to any dentist out there, because I love all of you, but I didn't want to feel for kids like they were going to the dentist. I wanted them to feel as though this was something they wanted to do. So we tried to create an environment where it was built around excitement, proactivity, not being reactive, engaging the kids in things that they love, and realizing that there's a lot more to Judaism than maybe what they have in their stereotypical mind. And that's how the program started. So I was in the homes working with kids on a day-to-day basis, teaching them and exploring. And I loved it because I was, again, on the ground with the kids learning, and the kids had a chance to find their own way. Some of them took it back to the synagogues that their families had been part of and had their Bene mitzvahs there. Some of them took it on travels to programs to Israel. And some of them decided to do a little bit of our approach to having a Bene mitzvah outside of the walls of a synagogue. Again, there's not right or wrong, but there's lots of ways to create kehillah, to create community. And that was our goal for these families. And for some families that were intermarried or had, you know, even the parents came from two different, a conservative and reform background and had different beliefs in how they should do it, or their generational grandparents and aunts and uncles had one way of thoughts. Our approach allowed everybody to kind of come together, and everyone could kind of get a piece of the pie, and they could share it without having to overwhelm the rest. And that's been the essence of who we've been in Dugma for, I guess now really we are talking about over 20 years, which again is shocking. Which, you know, as I was thinking about this conversation, I even have some of my kids that I tutored years ago and now part of our team. So the notion of paying it forward, and the notion of leading by example, because again, I truly believe kids are the best mentors for other kids over us, you know, gray hair folk. So the more that we have that connectivity, the more sometimes maybe our wisdom can kind of be more impactful in that sense. And that's the essence of what we've been trying to do from day one. And I think we've had a chance to grow. You know, we work closely with different synagogues throughout the area and families, and we've really just created a very open environment. We encourage all of our families to be part of synagogues as well. We want you to go to shul and be part of that environment, because that we're not doing. So we know what we do, and we're very clear what we don't do. And we don't think it should be one or the other. We want it to be a little bit of everything as a whole. So be part of your shul, but there's a way for you to have, you know, more than one slice of the different pies out there.
I love all that, and all the follow-up questions are now swimming through my head. So I'll go one at a time. I have to imagine that you were probably one of the earliest people, and maybe even the earlier Jewish organizations, to really take this approach and mindset in a kind of formal, professional way, right? I'm sure there have always been conversations. Yes, you know, figure things out, let's talk. But you really seem to make this not only formal, professional, and public, but also kind of giving like that stamp of approval from a Jewish authority. And I don't know if you looked at yourself as a Jewish authority. But
no, I don't.
You're really kind of giving the stamp of approval to saying, hey, find your way, find your path. I'm here to help you. I have to imagine you're one of the early organizations that was doing that.
Look, I don't know if I've ever thought about it, because obviously there's so many wonderful organizations that have a chance to impact, you know, the Jewish youth and families around the world, and especially New York, you know, which, you know, us New York centric people think we're the hub of everything. Right. So,
I lived in New York for 12 years.
Yeah,
so yes,
that works, right? So there's New York and there's everywhere else.
Yeah.
So with regard to that, you know, maybe that's the case. I think my history of being part of like a BBYO and being part of the Masada Israel programs and being part of Young Judea, and also growing up in a conservative synagogue and seeing that lifestyle and going to Camp Ramah, I've had a chance to see all the different types of organizations that operate. So I don't think I'm anything more or less than that, probably just an ongoing extension of what that was. There's a lot of wonderful programs out there that operate in the same model that we do in the New York area, with some we collaborate with. Sometimes I'll send families to someone else because maybe they're a better fit than what we can provide them at that moment in time. The beauty of being in New York is there are 9 million of us, right? And it's the second largest Jewish population in the world. And even in my tutoring company, I'm my competition and so forth, we still have a collegial approach to it because there's enough to go around for all of us to share. Again, going back to that pie analogy, there's enough for us to share together. So I might have been in the early stages of this approach, but as the world has evolved in the last 20 years, it seems to fit those that want to make sure they have connectivity to their history and their ancestry and their family approach to Judaism, but also make sure that their kids have something going forward because as we know, we are less than 2% of the world. So, if I always tell the kids, you take hopefully I'm doing the math right live here, right? But if you take 100 pennies out of $1, we're 2 pennies of $1 compared to all the money out there. So we're a quick sneeze and we're gone, right? So we do have to make sure that the connectivity stays on. Our approach in Judaism in Dugma is very clear cut in my mind. We have an endless curriculum. Right. I mean, because obviously learning about Judaism, you've never completed the journey. Right. As my Bubby always told me, there's always more for us to learn. Right. But our goal is not to try to teach you Judaism in one manner. Our goal is just to inform you and put as much information as we can in your back pocket. So then when you're older, you can make a decided decision on how you want to practice your Judaism from a position of knowledge and information and not from Jewish guilt. Because I do think the notion of Jewish guilt worked well maybe during our childhood and so forth to a degree, or at least you kind of felt it more, or maybe just I felt it more. Maybe that's it, right? But I don't think that's enough for us to practice Judaism on the notion that we have to because we have to. If you have knowledge, then you can decide to be part of something. And you can decide when you walk into a synagogue, our goal is that when you walk into a shul, you can grab the siddur and know what a siddur is. You can participate in the prayers with your eyes open or your eyes closed. You don't have to, and so forth. No one has to know what you know, but you have to be informed. Otherwise, you sit there and then you start counting tiles, or you start looking at the windows a little bit too much, or you start to zone out. Then you're like, why am I here? So if you want to go, we tell our students all the time too, go to shul for a half hour. If that's as much as you have in you, go for a half hour. I mean, I like baseball to a degree. After 4 innings, I'm done with baseball. I mean, I've had my fill. So I don't have to go to all 9 innings, but I can enjoy 4 or 5 innings of a game and then leave. It's the same thing at shul. Go to part of it, enjoy it, and leave it a high note. It's okay. And because it's going to be there again next Shabbat.
So I want to follow up on guilt and affirmation in a moment, because those are very important things to me. But a couple of times you've talked about things which have triggered an experience that I've had, which perhaps you have not had. I would hypothesize that if Dugma were founded in a smaller Jewish community that maybe only has a couple of synagogues, or maybe there's real competition for resources, I would imagine you'd experience some level of pushback. And as much as you want to collaborate, and with my organization, with Own Your Judaism, I want to collaborate with any and every existing Jewish institution out there. I hope and dream that my work is complementary, not competitive. And it sounds like you're saying the same thing. Have you experienced any kind of pushback? Have you experienced, and I know we work together, right?
Yeah.
I was a rabbi of a shul in New York too, and I officiated at the family.
It is funny, the 2 boys that you officiated for, I had lunch with them a couple weeks ago. We still, and just so you know, not to get into it with you, Moish, but they are fantasy football. I mean, their knowledge is almost surpasses yours, I will say. But with that,
wait, you can't say that.
I actually can. Well, we should have a separate conversation with the 4 of us. But I saw them last month, and we still have to get together like every couple months when they're back in town and so forth. Because there's that.
Oh, that's amazing.
So it's beautiful. Look, you're asking a great question. I can only answer with where I've done it from, right? If I was back in Milwaukee, if I was back in a different environment 20 years ago, and we know there's only a couple shuls, would it be more pushback than what I was offering? Probably without a question, because there's only X number of Jews in a small community, where in New York, there's an endless number of Jews that we're all not reaching, right? So there has to be. I haven't had direct pushback. I've had some families that have had their own quandary or debate internally. Their family's been part of a shul for so many years and generation after generation, and then they realize for their particular child, a different model fits better. So it's probably been more of not me feeling the challenge, but maybe the families, because they're leaving what they've had to what they've always done, right? But I've always tried to say, you don't have to leave that shul. Like, that's still your home. But for your particular child, and sometimes your particular child is a learner, is also the thing. And I think that's the key difference. Again, I have this debate with all the rabbis here in New York. I think their challenge is much greater than ours in our approach, because they have to take these kids after a full day of school, mesh them together from 87 different schools into a Hebrew school classroom, and they all have a lot of energy, and they're supposed to sit down for another 2 hours. Now, we know third, fourth, fifth graders, they have a lot of energy by 4 o'clock. That's a very hard model. So they're offering them, broccoli, and I get to offer them ice cream, right? Like, hey, we could do Sunday at 5 o'clock or Sunday at 10 in the morning, or we could do Tuesday at 9 o'clock at night when you're done with everything and you're relaxed, right? And we can guide the conversation we're having towards an interest that you might have, and then we'll make sure to bring it back to get enough of our checklist done. So it's comparing apples and oranges. So it's not a fair comparison in that sense. So I've always tried to say it shouldn't be either or, because then we've lost as a community, right? Like, you can learn from us on a Sunday morning, but that Friday night beautiful service at, Bene Geshen with the music and so forth, at Park Avenue, where they just have a lot of energy, go and be part of that. But come to us on Sunday. It's okay. You can get a little bit of both. And then if you are back in that Hebrew school environment for a class, or you're back in something at the shul, you might have some more information that you'll feel comfortable sharing. So the answer is yes. If we were doing it in a small environment 20 years ago, I do gather there'd be a lot more pushback, because there'd be a much shorter audience. But I can go out to 10 families, and if we get lucky to have 4 or 5 join us, we're okay. But because there's always going to be 10 more, right? If we do that in a smaller community, there might only be 40 families. And then, so I don't know if it would have worked as well 20 years ago from this model somewhere else.
And I would imagine part of the reason maybe you haven't gotten so much pushback is because of your collaborative approach, right? I would imagine if you're working with a kid for a couple of years and they say, Phil, I love you, let's go get lunch once in a while, but I don't want to learn with you anymore because I want to learn more at the synagogue, you'd look at that as a celebration and a success.
Listen, without question, I think the one thing we all need to do from a Jewish education standpoint is, the Bene Mitzvah experience, right? Like, for whatever reason in the world of American Jewry, the having a B Mitzvah, right, is now meaning that you've reached the top of the mountain. You've now you have your card and you've reached the top of the mountain. As I've always learned when I was younger, and then that was kind of pounded into me and so forth, and I understand it now more than I did back then. That's when you just got the entry into the amusement park, right? Yeah. And I do wish
to go on the ride.
Yeah, right? we just got over that green line, and I'm still trying to go over the green line because obviously I'm still shorter than short. But like we it's not. You're right. It's not as though we have finished going to the amusement park. We just get to go on all the rides now. And I think as a community and as educators, I think somewhere we really need to put more of our energy towards is helping post B mitzvah become when the kids actually continue to learn. So we have developed with our students, and not all of them continue, because for them, that is their moment, and they'll hopefully come back to it later in life. And again, that's why we do the notion of arming them with information so they can kind of come back and be connected to something. But we have worked very hard to have our students continue afterwards in learning. We have a post-B mitzvah program that we created that then deals with some teenage issues and real life issues that they're going to face. And what would Jewish texts say about that? Or what are Jews around the world? How are their teenagers handling that? And that also led us to then take some of these students that I just mentioned to you that we had dinner with, that you were the Rebbe for. We all then took them to Israel for 10 days. So I've had a chance to take some of our own kids every couple summers to Israel on a tour, which then frankly led to the regrowth of Me'ever, because I realized that we have to bring it all back together, and we have to not just take the kids, the parents have to go, and the multi-generations have to go, and we want to go with the organizations and the synagogues and the shuls and the schools, because the notion of connectivity to Israel has evolved dramatically over the last 20 years, right? You could say it evolved in a positive or negative way. That's the ongoing debate now. But in my mind, the connectivity to our heritage and the history and the land has diminished to a degree. So we've worked very hard these last handful of years to bring a lot of excitement to going back to Israel to learn about how you can reconnect to your Judaism in a different place than just where you are here now. And Mayever is trying to create, again, that's why, our conversations offline here and why you're part of our leadership team now for Mayever on the educational side is that it's not just the trip in Israel, right? It's the pre-learning of going to Israel. How do you bring that back? The same thing with the Bene Mitzvah. You have the pre-learning for the B Mitzvah, and then afterwards you've got to continue that learning, right? And so it's again, it's like that Venn diagram is all connected and to making sure that we have an ongoing connection to who we were and we are and who we're going to become, with our Jewish, our Yiddishkeit.
Yeah. So we'll lead into Mayever in just a moment. I actually love how you're connecting Mayever, which is a travel company, and we'll talk more about that.
Absolutely.
How you're talking about different steps along the life journey. That it's not just about learning with a kid. I've done my part. Good luck, go on your way. If you can stay connected and continue to help out throughout their lives. But I want to go back to guilt and positivity for a moment, because you said there's no benefit to that guilt used to be effective. And I kind of did like that half head shake. And I've always found that guilt can be effective to get someone to do something one time, right? That being said,
correct.
Afterwards, I think it creates much more antipathy than it does connection. Because if someone keeps saying, oh, you got to do this and guilt, it builds resistance. It builds disinterest. And I think you and I would say the same thing. Please let me know if I'm wrong. I don't want to ever guilt anyone into do something. I want to help you understand it so that you can start creating for yourself a positive relationship with, connection to this. And then if you choose to do it, it's out of curiosity, interest, passion, maybe a little bit of pressure from a mentor saying, you got to try it once. But guilt, I just don't think it works.
No, look, I agree with you 110%. I do look a little bit of guilt or doing something because someone else in your orbit or someone that you believe in or care for asks you to do it. Yeah. I think we have that responsibility. Yeah. I do think 20 years ago, you can get us back in the door more often on guilt than you can now. But I still don't think it was the right model, right? It just worked more effectively 20 years ago than it does now. That's kind of what my point was. And I think thanks for pointing that out. I do think we have to get away from that in that sense. Like, again, I have two boys and some of them they're afraid, just like I am, you're afraid to try something new. So if you don't make them try something because they don't want to, they'll never try that new type of food or that new experience. And they won't realize if they actually loved it or hated it. Right. And maybe they do have to try it a second time because now is the first time you had a chance to experience it because you were a little bit more, nervous about the environment. So I do think there's okay to push a little bit, but after a piece of that, and maybe guilt's the wrong word, but after that initial push and so forth, they have to take the steps themselves as well, or at least understand, let me try this again. Even if I don't like it, I can see something out of it and something inside will resonate with them. So our goal was to kind of create that feel, and listen, my happiest moments were when parents would call me up and scream at me and say, listen, I can't believe we have to come home early from the Hamptons on Sunday and be in traffic because, Max doesn't want to miss his class or something, like that was like wonderful for us. Or they were going to skip their tennis lesson because it conflicted with a, meeting with myself or one of our teachers because they actually they enjoyed that experience, right? So that's the model that we're trying to create. Now, again, do they love every class every moment of the day? Do they love when they have to sit there and kind of do the rote work a little bit? No one likes to do the push-ups every day. But if you decide to mix that in with other things as well, because again, there's so many vast midrashes and there's so many vast stories, both ancient and modern. Like there's a lot of really cool modern Jews that have accomplished a lot of wonderful things for the world, or even just in their own little realm. It could even be an athlete. It could be a musician. Whatever it is, it could be an actor. Like it's okay to see that you can practice your Judaism. Again, I think one of the things that I've tried to do is like, you get a student for the first time, you have them close their eyes and say, picture a typical Jew, right? And often they'll create more of a religious look than someone else. Yeah, the payas, the hat, you and I walking on the street, you don't know left or right because we don't have some of the typical features that, you would wear on the outer of someone. So we're trying to spell that as well too, because, who we are on the inside is what's important, right? I mean, You know, as they say, the one lesson we try to teach our kids, no matter what, is be a mensch. Like everything else is secondary after that in Judaism, in my mind, right? If you're a mensch and so forth, and you know the notion of like, you know, treat your neighbors like you want, you know, treat others like you treat yourself. Like they say, everything else in the Torah is commentary, right?
Yes.
So we pound that home, and when kids understand that we're trying to help teach them how to be a better person through the lens of something, I think they connect more to that than sometimes the roteness of chanting a tefillah or a prayer that they may not really know what it means, because it's ancient language versus something they can kind of grasp. So we try to build that foundational piece first, and then we say, listen, you have to learn the Shema and V'Haf, and here's the reasons why.
Yep.
Okay, you have to learn it. These are the reasons why. Just like you have to brush your teeth every day, you have to have this in your back pocket. That's it. And then we explain the reason why. You might not love it, but you at least can understand why. And then they're more willing to practice it versus the I told you so. Because as we know, and my mom can know, like, you know, nothing bothered me more than I told you so.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing those reflections, Phil. Thank you. So you talked a little bit about May Ever, and I know what May Ever is, and I'm thrilled and honored to be part of May Ever. For anyone who's on my email list and who opens my emails and reads my emails, that's 3 things they have to do. Be on the list. 3 things you have to do,
right? Open and read, totally.
Exactly. You'll know what May Ever is. And for all the other people who are watching live or at other point, what is May Ever, Phil? And why in particular now, in the past 6 months, 8 months, have you really you're putting a lot more time into it, a lot more of your energy into it? Why now?
When I first moved to New York back in the early 90s, I started working for an organization called the Masada Israel Programs. And that was built from, I was fortunate to take one of the early Milwaukee community as their counselor to Israel through this organization.
Oh.
So when I was in Israel with all of our kids from Milwaukee, I was fortunate to be asked to actually come work in the national office in New York for the Israel program. And you know, it was time to kind of stretch my wings from Wisconsin. So I took that on for a few years, and I was getting to go to Israel every summer for 3, 4, 5 months at a time. And I have family there, and I just personally love the place. And the idea of like, I would, you know, one of my asks or I don't want to say demands, but my, you know, requirements, because obviously you get paid nickels, was that I would get to lead a group. And then the rest of the time I could be part of the management team. But I wanted to lead one of the groups for 6 weeks every summer. And I loved everything about it. You know, it was 24/7. You're engaged with the kids. You're on the ground. Like you're watching them see this land and meet the people and eat the food and feel the dust and like, frankly, stand on the history. Like one of my favorite parts of we'd walk through Jerusalem, they would actually stand on a rock that was 3,000 years old that had connectivity to us versus seeing it in a museum. So it was like, that was always like, I loved everything about that. So I got a chance to do that and do that through Young Judea and Hadassah. And then life veered, as I said, and I started work on this program, but Israel's always been a strong piece of who I am. And I would take my family back every summer for the last 10 years. I would take my boys and my wife. We'd go back and spend, you know, a chunk of time in the summer to be with my family because I wanted them to connect to my mishpacha in Israel. So it's never left me. And I had a chance to do a one-day tour with someone I met, Bene, who has a touring program in Israel. And his philosophy is very similar to your and mine. He just does it in Israel through the travel world. And we were talking, and about 4 years ago, I started sending my families through him to go to Israel. And I realized it wasn't enough because they would go for this moment of time, come back, they'd make their Apple album, it'd sit on their coffee table, and that was their Israel connectivity. And every so often they'd have a random memory. And I'm like, Bene, this is not enough. They need ongoing education. They need ongoing connectivity to Israel. So we started to put together our larger plan. We called it May Ever, which means to go beyond, because we wanted to go beyond what the general Israel tour was offering. Spectacular. You know, as we say all the time, you as a customer don't know what you're not getting when you're in Israel. We know what you missed if we didn't do it at 110%. So we're trying to bring that in Israel and also bring that here. So we started the notion of let's do pre-trip, pre-learning and post-learning. And obviously, you know, we were just about to launch in spring of 19. Is that when the world changed?
Yeah.
Then the world changed. Obviously, the skies closed. So we pivoted from really launching our combination of Let Travel and Dugma into May Ever. And we started doing a lot of virtual tours. we must have done about 10,000 hours of virtual tours over the next 18 months because people still wanted to connect to Israel and visit Israel. So we created these virtual tours that were not frontal presentations. There were GoPros, there were people out in the field. You had a chance to they were interactive. Do you want to go left down this alley in Tel Aviv or go right down that alley? So we made it very interactive and people loved it. And that kind of enhanced our philosophy that, hey, we can do pre and post teaching and learning with our families and our communities, which we're doing. And again, that's where you come in because you're our educator to make sure that our communities that we work with and our families that we work with go into understanding what they can learn prior to Israel and how they get to bring that back in their communities to make it cyclical for their next group that's going and onward and onward. And I don't know anybody else that's doing it where it is becoming a full circle type of environment and engagement. And I think that's what excited me. And that's why I'm passionate about it. Because again, it's a chance to bring like the Dugma philosophy of finding your, again, using your own, finding your own Judaism, right? But finding it here, taking it there, learning more about it there, and then bringing it back and enhancing it here. And again, it could be religious, it could be cultural, but it could be, you go to see a basketball game in Israel or a soccer match on the beach or a theater show or whatever it is. There's ways to connect to your Judaism in Israel. And, we're so fortunate that, we've been in, we have 50 plus years of experience because we've been doing this collectively, individually. Now we've brought it to the collective whole. We've already had some communities go. We had one from Minneapolis that just returned. We have families that are all going that just came back from their June break. We have some in August. We have some more communities going in December. So we're starting to kind of really, build the program at a larger scale to allow strong connectivity to finding your Judaism both here and in, quote unquote, our homeland. And it's fun. It's just fun.
Clearly, I've bought fully into that philosophy.
Totally.
Because I'm honored to be part of the team. And, I know if I were to ask you the question, what distinguishes the Amei Ever tour on the ground in Israel from other places? I know you have a wonderful answer because
I do have a wonderful answer. And I'm going to say, look, there's a lot of great tours. Oh, sorry. There's one more piece.
No, yeah, I was going to say, and take as much time as you want to say it. What really strikes me is when you're talking about the differentiation between Amei Ever and other places, I know you put together a remarkable itinerary. It is unique. It's one of a kind. I haven't seen anything like it. You talk about the differentiation as a lot of times when you experience something, you go, you have a great time, and then you look into the albums. But Israel is just different for the vast majority of people who go, right? You're coming with things. You're bringing excitement, energy, questions, uncertainties. And when you come home, you want it to impact you after you get back. And people who go wanted to do the same. I love that's what you're focusing on is the differentiation.
I think that's a big piece of the puzzle for us. Like, we just had a dad and his daughter go, and the dad has a strong history. His mother actually was born in Israel pre-1948. So She actually has a Palestinian passport, which is so interesting, right? And it was important that dad wanted to show, and his daughter's been there when she was younger, but wanted to take her for a couple of days. So what we really try to do is, look, the top 10 sites anywhere you go in the world, the top 10 sites anywhere you go in the world, right? And everyone needs to go and check it off their checklist. But I think it's how you see them sometimes, or the approach that you're given prior to going, or making sure that you understand your audience member. Like, I know this particular student quite well. I know that she has a very strong connection to Israel, and she's not sure why. And she has a strong connection to women's rights and finding the woman's voice. So we made sure that she was with a tour guide who actually wrote a book on women's rights in Israel. So she had that connect. It was a beautiful shidduch, as we say, right? Yeah. So, but at the same time, the father has his own history of connectivity to Israel. So the tour guide has to also relate to him and make sure it brought some extra layers that he would appreciate as well, because even though he's been there 20, 30, 40 times, he's going to see this now through the lens of his daughter, but also has his own experience, right? So I think a lot of the work that we do, again, it's the same work we do in Dugma, or we do in Amei Ever, or in our tutoring company that does 2 + 2. Like I always say, 2 + 2 is always 4. It's never going to change. But if I can't teach it to you in a way that you understand, it doesn't matter how much knowledge I have, right? Mm-hmm. So we put a lot of energy into really understanding who you are, what your dynamic is, how we can take you out of your comfort zone where you want to experience something new, but also feel confident to try it, right? So there's a lot of wonderful touring companies in Israel. You said the word before, like Me'ever as a travel company. I almost stopped you, but I figured we'd get back to it because yes, we travel. We're not going to flight. We're not booking your flights, right? But we're going to book your land time in Israel. If it's a week, 10 days, a month, with it, we just had a 3-week synagogue there that had 3 buses there, right? There, you have to create an environment that the kids are going to be willing to get out of their comfort zone and learn something new, and then take it back and resonate with them. So that's what we try to bring. We have a travel component because we're traveling to Israel, but we're an educational-based program that at the same time will also take you to the best food in Tel Aviv because it's one of the top culinary cities in the world right now. You'll still have a chance to, drive an ATV in the desert if you want and go sand duning or going rappelling or have some of these highlight moments that you do on vacation. But at the same time, you want to make sure that you meet the people of the country, and you can meet the people, and we want you to have those debates with them and have interactions that can, maybe they feel uncomfortable you're having them with them, but it's a learning moment, right? Because again, no one's perfect. The Israeli environment's not perfect. And it's important that you understand and see the warts that are there, just like American Jewry warts that we have here, or as an everyday person. So we're not trying to bring you into a fantasy bubble because that's not real, but we want you to see the beauty and at the same time see the real of the place. And I think that helps us stand out because we're not trying to sugarcoat the environment. We're just trying to make sure that you understand it from within, and not just the first, I use this all the time with our staff. You cannot just peel the first layer of the onion for our kids. Everyone can do that. You've got to get down to layer 3, 4, 5, down to the bottom of the core. And when you get there, then they're yours. And then you can really start learning with them. And that's the Me'ever approach. And our team in Israel comes from that same environment. They are truly educators. They go out there every week to a new location and try a new module, and then they come back and forth and so forth. And then we decide, is that right for who we are, how they're teaching it? And if it's purely just a tourist moment, we'll sprinkle those in. But if it hasn't enough meat on the bone, then then you want something different than what we're offering.
I love it.
It's fun.
Phil, if we can talk personally a little bit, how do you own your Judaism in your life? You've talked a lot about ways that you have helped, in particular kids, but also families and communities own their Judaism and make meaning for themselves. How do you do it in your life?
Well, I was hoping you would not get to that question, but here we are.
You don't have to.
No, it's okay. Look, I think it's an ongoing internal fight for me too, right? I think culturally and who I am as an individual, it's everything of what I am. I don't try to hide that. I'm very comfortable with who I am in my skin and where I've come from and who I am. I still constantly debate the religious perspective of Judaism and how I practice it. I know all the tefillot. I teach you how to lay in the Torah. I even help officiate Bene Mitzvahs. I will personally officiate 20 or so every single year. So for me, I think a lot of it does happen through the lens of my students as well, because when I'm up there on the bima with my kids and they're going through, the siddur that we've created for them, and I'm with them and I'm watching them grow in that moment up there, and we're leading the tefillot that way, I feel like that's part of who my Judaism actually is. But that doesn't mean I'm going to shul every single week. It doesn't mean that our family every single week, we'll do all the Shabbat tefillot and so forth. We do always try to find some family time on Shabbat, whatever that might mean. It could be different every week, but I think it's important. It's a constant evolution. And again, it goes back to I think, my Bubby is my superhero and my muse in life. And I remember asking her years ago, I have a very unique perspective on the notion of Kashrut, right? I'll throw that out there. I think there's a lot of debate on the validity of how we engage with Kashrut for different reasons. That's another conversation. And I used to ask my Bubby, why do you keep such strict kosher? I need to understand it. Part of it was health reasons back in the ancient days, and we have healthier food and these other reasons and all these things that we could debate about it. And she says, she goes, look, for me, it's a discipline. It's something that I do every day, and it keeps me on course. So I have a disciplined way of approaching what I do. Find yours. I remember clear as day. You got to find your discipline and figure out what that is, and then stick with it and keep tweaking it so you have it going in the right direction for yourself. So, I'm still searching for all of the right piece of the puzzle. I think my Bubby found it earlier than the most of us ever did. Maybe that's why she was like the Milwaukee Bubby, That's why everybody called her Hubby in
She
that sense.
was.
You know, so look, it's obviously everything who I am. You know, how I practice it, I think continuously evolves, and probably as my boys get older and they have their families and so forth, it might evolve even more then. I don't know. Yeah. I assume it will.
All right, so take a deep breath, Phil. In a moment, I'm going to ask you to share your personal approach and relationship to and attitude about Kashrut. Now, before I ask you to share, I'm going to do two things. One, I am going, well, actually three things. One, I'm willing to guess that you and I are probably far more aligned than we are not on the same page, even though I don't know what you're going to say and you don't know my approach. Two, I am hopefully going to be done with the draft of my first book by the end of summer. Hopefully, hopefully, the last chapter is going to be something along the lines of there's no such thing as a bad Jew. We talked about guilt. We talked about those things. So it's ingrained in us that we have to make apologetics. Like, I don't go to shul every week, or I don't do this, or I don't do it this way. Totally. That's not my belief, certainly. And the third thing is when I ask you, so Phil, I'd love to hear about your approach to Kashrut. When I say that, a possible response is, Moish, I know we're a little low on time. Let's save that conversation for another day. I'm giving you the out if you feel you need it. So Phil, I'd love to hear about your approach to Kashrut.
Well, I don't think I can get totally into it because we are running out of time, but I'll give you a taste of my thought. And again, I'm not a scholar, so I'm very careful about how I approach this. From what I understand, you can teach me more. There's very few words in the Torah about Kashrut. I believe there's one sentence, if it's even a full sentence, right? So what did we do? We took this one sentence and we elaborated and created it into much more. From what I understand, in the early days, the notion of Kashrut had to do more with the dirtiness of an animal and some health reasons in the ancient times. Again, that's one thought, right, that I always understood. So that made sense to me. The rabbis of our time and the leaders of our time, because we weren't yet rabbis of our time, right, were making sure that we, frankly, lived a few more years than not. Mm-hmm. Makes complete sense to me. Things have evolved over time. Now, again, I'm a businessman myself, as are you, or even though you're, a scholar. I have a few different businesses with the notion to better myself financially, like anybody else in that sense. I do feel at times the notion of Kashrut has gone well past some, in my mind, readily acceptable lines, right? I wonder why, and maybe we'll leave it after this one. Why does chicken have to cost 4 times more if it's with a hechsher on it? And depending what the hechsher is, if it's a K, a U, a triangle, which Rebbe, as we see, inflation is what, 9.1% right now and rising? Mm-hmm. The everyday cost of food is we're already focusing on the cost of gas, but if you really look at it, the cost of food is really where our troubles are going to be as a country right now. It's not the gas, because the rest of the world
good for you.
Anyway.
Food that's good for you in particular.
Food that's good for you.
Yeah.
Correct. Fruits, vegetables, not even talking about organic. I'm just talking about some of the natural stuff before you get to that realm. Then you add kashrut on top of that. Now, again, I lived in a very loving house. We kept kosher. We always had enough of what we needed, but I can definitely know that sometimes there was a little bit of a concern about we can't get this or that because, the Shabbat meal costs X dollars. Mm-hmm. As a kid, whatever, you move on, you eat mac and cheese. We're from Wisconsin. Who says no to mac and cheese, right? So, but nowadays, when I see families struggling a little bit and they have to want to have chicken for their family, and if you go to the regular market at Trader Joe's and you spend $3, but then you have to go to the butcher and it's $15, there needs to be an understanding that if you can't do that, you're then not practicing Judaism in a proper way because you can't afford the ask that's being asked of you. So I have a little bit of a philosophical and moral dilemma with the business side of Kashrut these days, and I do maybe the original intention of what Kashrut is. So if we can, we'll leave it there, but there needs to be a way to make it readily available to the everyday individual, because again, it's the everyday individual that's the practicer versus those that can afford it without thinking about it.
So I love that approach, that in some ways with the extreme cost of kosher food, then you make kosher food a product of some combination of either the affluent Jews, or the Jews for whom things beyond kashrut, nothing matters compared to it. And you're going to dedicate all of your resources to something like that. And we have to acknowledge that those are subsets of Judaism. That's not mainstream Judaism. That's not normative Judaism. It doesn't represent in many ways the ethos of a lot of Jews too. So how do we take something like a kashrut practice, which has its own historical origins and customs and traditions? How do we take something like that and make it work in a way that honors the ideals of kashrut, some of the laws of kashrut, and just the people on the street? And money's not the most important thing, but you can't simply ignore it or dismiss it.
It's true, and if we can figure out a way to do that, and also remove the judgment perspective that some seem to have around it, as you said before, we shouldn't have to apologize for our approach, right? That's being reactive, and I'd much rather be a proactive individual in what we do. So if we can remove some of that shtick or piece that we and scrub that off of our model of operation, I think it would have much more powerful effect. And
if the conversation centered on why do we keep kosher, not how do you keep kosher, right? What is the import of kashrut in our lives as Jews? What can it teach us? How do we live it out in our food choices?
And how there's different ways to actually choose to do it also. Like one adage, I know we have to go in a minute, but I really tell this to my boys all the time, and my staff and myself. Everyone makes their own Shabbos.
Yeah.
I grew up in a very, conservative household with specific rules and so forth. And, as my mom will tell you, I questioned them 1,001 different ways. And often I got satisfactory answers, and sometimes I got very unsatisfactory answers, because I told you approach that, I always had a challenge with that. I'm like, well, it's supposed to be in the scriptures. We're supposed to find it somewhere, right? I've learned, and I really believe that everyone makes their own Shabbos. And if we kind of have that model and we follow it, then that's without judgment. So how you choose to practice and how I choose to practice, it's no different. I know we were going to talk fantasy football, but we have different opinions on what a trade offer is, or the quality of a player on a team, right? We're coming from different positions. Typically you're wrong, but we let that be. But that being said, here, everyone makes their own Shabbos, and if we take that without judgment, I truly believe that we would be we'd be in a better place as a whole.
You're challenging me, Phil, because on the one hand, you're giving me a fantasy football dig, daring me to respond when I'm supposed to have my professional hat on here and engaging with that. Very, very, very well played. Yes. Here's what I'd like to do. When we get off, I'd love to spend a couple of minutes, and maybe it might not have to be right after, because I know you and I have another meeting right after this.
Totally.
But maybe we'll talk for a couple of minutes. I'd love to hear more about your approach to kashrut. And if you're amenable to it, maybe we'll do another conversation where you and I, it's live, we put out there our thoughts on kashrut. I don't know how much of a polemic what you're going to say will be against the kashrut industry. I know a lot of what I would say could be perceived as a polemic. So
I probably would not be a lobbyist for the. I probably would not be a lobbyist for the kashrut community. I don't think I would get endorsed in that sense. But
sometimes it's nice to have another person having the same conversation. So we'll check in afterwards, but maybe we'll follow up and do a conversation of kashrut.
I welcome it.
Great. Anything else you want to share, add in about your Jewish life, about some of your professional work?
No. I really believe from the professional standpoint, like, again, right or wrong, we don't do a lot of advertising and marketing. I think we really do a lot of word of mouth. I believe when it comes to, I think in all the different areas, I wear different hats. I truly believe it's child development. And I think we're not selling widgets. So I don't look to mass market in that sense, because I want to make sure that we can provide value for our families, especially for our kids, because especially after these last few years that these kids have gone through, they need all the positive support that they can get. And it reminds us that, again, I know I run an academic tutoring company, and we want all our kids to go to great colleges and so forth. But I think our as we've reworked some of the stuff that we've done in the last few years based on the world around us, we're spending more of our focus on the social emotional well-being of our kids and our families. And I think that has to have much more importance than a letter grade at times. And I think, you know, as we joke, I probably wasn't the greatest student in Nicolay High School or in college at times. We'll let that go there. But, you know, you have to just keep willing to find your way. And, you know, like as my bubby said, find a discipline that you're comfortable with learning from and building off of. And then, you know, and if you do that while you're a mensch and don't always try to get the big piece of chicken and be willing to share that as well, I think everything kind of worked itself out. You know, there's my older son went to this great school in the middle school, and the principal, who is I think probably one of the greatest educators I've ever met in my life, says if we could teach our kids the notions of being critical thinkers and advocate for themselves, then there's nothing they can't figure out later on. And so we kind of take that philosophy with the notion of treat others how you want to be treated and try to meld that all together. And, you know, I'm lucky to have the most spectacular teachers that work for me, and the spectacular individuals that I collaborate with, like, you know, yourself and, you know, my brother Simcha is part of my ever team and so forth. And, like, you know, what he does on a daily basis to make sure that that vision that we're trying to impart happens is beyond explaining the next, you know, 30 seconds. But if we can, so, you know, my goal is to make my bubby proud. So if I that's really, I don't really have any other objective.
Well, that is beautiful. That's beautiful. You know, I don't know if you were being modest or if it just didn't come up so much, but I know you talked a lot about intergenerational, lifelong learning. You know, you use different words. You know, teaching Jews, not teaching how to be Jewish, but teaching what Judaism is, helping guide people, and having connections beyond. And I just know from some of the other collaborative projects that we're working on, again, like the meeting we're having right afterwards, when Phil says that it's his goal to work with, in particular, kids, to help them learn about Judaism, to help them then teach other people and to model for other people, this is not simply a beautiful vision for Phil. This is the work he is doing. So I've seen it firsthand, and it's such a joy and an honor and a privilege to be able to collaborate with you. And I deeply appreciate your sharing so much of your experience and your wisdom and your passion with all of us. And may we all learn from you that we can really teach other people to be their most authentic selves. And if we're not sharing what we have with others and helping them share with the next generation, then, you know, we all want to do your bubby proud, Phil.
We all do. All of us that know her from Milwaukee and so forth, I think we all have that same goal.
We really do.
Nobody wants that look from Bubby.
Great.
So thank you. I really, really enjoyed being part of this. Thank you for the invite. It was wonderful.
Thank you so much for your joining. Thanks for all of your wisdom, Phil.
All right. We'll speak soon.
Sounds good.
Very soon. All right. Yes.